Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be discussing 1984 by George Orwell and why you should read it if you haven't already. This book runs approximately 328 pages long, but it depends on your edition. It was first written in 1948, which is why the title is 1984. It's actually the reverse, right? And that's for a reason. This book was originally titled The Last Man in Europe, but George Orwell, at the last minute, changed the title to 1984 to show that this dystopian future is much closer than you think. Now, I'm not going to spoil the book for you guys. I'm going to give you guys a spoiler-free summary. Then I'll give you guys a few books that I would branch off to after this. I'll give you guys a few movies that I think pair well with 1984, and I'll give you one documentary that I also would highly recommend. But before we get into all of that, I need to let you guys know a little bit about the man himself. George Orwell, born Eric Arthur Blair in British India, was a novelist, essayist, journalist, and critic whose searing honesty and unwavering dedication to truth marked him as one of the most influential writers of the 20th century. A staunch opponent to totalitarianism in all its forms, Orwell fought in the Spanish Civil War and chronicled the rise of oppressive regimes with unmatched clarity and foresight. His writings dissect themes of class, ideology, surveillance, and power with surgical precision, blending personal experience with biting political commentary. To read Orwell is to awaken to the dangers of manipulated truth, and 1984 remains a cornerstone of modern literature precisely because of his lifelong commitment to exposing uncomfortable realities. To read Orwell is to awaken to the dangers of manipulated truth, and 1984 remains a cornerstone of modern literature precisely because of his lifelong commitment to exposing uncomfortable reality. So yeah, hopefully that gives you guys a little bit more background on the man himself. It's not a full biography, obviously. One day I will do full biography videos on all of the greatest writers of all time, but I just wanted to give you guys a quick little blurb there to kind of explain where Orwell was coming from when he wrote this masterpiece. And this book, if this wasn't taught to you in school, if you didn't read this in grade, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, or 12, if you didn't read it in those years, I feel like your education suffered. I feel like your teachers failed you if they didn't let you or make you read this book. It's absolutely essential literature, especially if you really want to pull back the veil of reality. This book really opened my eyes when I first read it in school. It was the first book that I read that felt like revealed some sort of truth to me that I needed to seek on my own or I needed to feel with my reading of it. It wasn't something that could be just taught to me in a classroom. I had to experience it through reading such a masterwork like 1984. And I've come back to this book many times since. It's a life-changing book. Obviously, it's transformative literature. And I will do a full book analysis video on 1984 at some point in the future. We'll go through it chapter by chapter and dissect all the themes and the deeper psychology behind it because, like I've said many times now, it's an absolute masterpiece. So let's talk a little bit more about the book itself. I'll give you guys a quick summary here. 1984 is a masterwork of dystopian prophecy, immersing readers in a bleak, oppressive future ruled by an all-seeing authoritarian regime, where truth is malleable and thought itself is policed. The novel plunges into the heart of a society where history is rewritten daily. Language is weaponized into restriction, and rebellion flickers only in the private corners of the mind. Through chilling precision and poetic urgency, Orwell conjures a world suffocated by surveillance, psychological control, and the crushing machinery of the state, revealing the haunted consequences of unchecked political power. A literary warning wrapped in a gripping narrative, 1984 is not just a novel. It is a mirror held up to the darkest potentials of our civilization, and its resonance grows stronger with each passing year. So yeah, I hope that little summary really pushes you guys to go up and pick up this book for yourselves. Obviously, I think everybody should read it, but I think everybody should own a copy too, because you should come back to it many times throughout your life. It changes every time you read it, you get more from it, and looking at the world around us, it just becomes more and more real. However, I don't think this is the perfect dystopian novel. That's why I would pair it with another work. Another work that I will have a Why You Should Read video on tomorrow, so you guys can watch that video as well. I'd recommend reading both of these books at the same time. Now, I don't mean by that you should hold two books in front of you and go back and forth and read them literally at the same time, but you know what I mean. You should go back and forth and work through them with equal progression, because you'll see how they reflect off of each other, how they mirror each other. The book that I'm referring to, of course, is Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. It's a fantastic dystopian novel written a little bit before 1984. I believe Huxley wrote Brave New World in 1932, if I'm remembering that right. And I think Brave New World's a little bit more accurate than 1984. Now, obviously, 1984 has its place, and if you study the history of the Soviet Union, Maoist China, reading 1984 is essential, I think, if you really want to understand those regimes. Orwell did a great job of putting it into fiction. So Brave New World, 1984, match those two together. If you can't read two books at the same time, if it's too much for you, just read them back to back, because, like I said, you'll see how Huxley painted a dystopian future, and it's more like a utopian future gone wrong, and you'll see how Orwell's is a little bit more of a dark and bleak dystopian society. So I will talk about Brave New World, like I said, tomorrow when I do my Why You Should Read video on Brave New World. Another book that I would also branch off to after reading 1984 is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. Another book that's about, too much policing, cracking down on books, burning books. I don't want to give too much away about Fahrenheit 451, but again, I'll make a Why You Should Read video on that shortly. And yeah, just another fantastic work that's very similar to 1984. So if you're looking for a book to branch off to after this one, Fahrenheit 451 and obviously Brave New World are two excellent choices. I also highly recommend The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. Shout out to Margaret, she's a Canadian writer, and The Handmaid's Tale is another dystopian novel that goes into kind of totalitarian states, too much control, and it's another just fantastic place to branch off to after you're done reading 1984. A quick little fact about 1984, it was written when Orwell was in an advanced stage of tuberculosis. So he wrote it basically completely in his bed on a Scottish island, I believe called Jura. And yeah, seems like I cover quite a few writers on this channel who wrote their masterpieces while they were in great illness. But yeah, just a quick little fact there about how he wrote this book. So I'm going to move on now to some films and a documentary that I would highly recommend pairing with your reading of 1984. So the first film that I would recommend pairing with 1984 is, you've probably guessed it already if you know that this film exists, 1984. There is a direct film adaptation of this book, and I highly recommend it. It is a pretty good book. Stays pretty solid to the novel. Doesn't really deviate too much. John Hurt is in it, and he's absolutely fantastic. It also stars Richard Burton. And guess what year it came out in? They timed it perfectly. It came out in 1984, so that obviously would be the number one movie that I would suggest watching with your reading of 1984. After that, I recommend another film that's also kind of totalitarian in its story, but it's very weird, very odd, abstract, and bizarre. It's Brazil from 1985, and this was directed by Terry Gilliam, who was a member of the Monty Python troupe, and he's directed some pretty odd movies. Brazil probably being close to the top of that list, and it's one of my favorite films of all time. It's a critique of late-stage capitalism in a way, and it's also very, like I said, bizarre and surreal and absolutely absurd, and it's a really, really fun watch. So again, another film that kind of goes into totalitarianism and criticizes political regimes and political ideas. And the third film that I'll recommend today is one of my favorite films of all time. It's an incredibly underrated film. It came out in 2006. It's called The Lives of Others, and it kind of tells the story of I believe it takes place in East Germany, and it tells the story of a man who's spying in on somebody else's family. So you're kind of watching a film that's almost from Big Brother's perspective, and it's very, very fascinating. It keeps you gripped from start to finish. It is a German film, I believe, so you have to watch it in subtitles, but man, it's one of the most underrated films of all time. It's one of the greatest thrillers I've ever seen in my life. I would say it's probably the strongest film out of the three films that I've mentioned today. So those are three 3 films that I would recommend if you guys want to branch off and watch something with your reading of 1984. And I will also recommend the 2003 BBC documentary on George Orwell. You can find it on YouTube, but if you want a little bit more information about George Orwell and his life and where he was coming from in writing this book, I highly recommend that documentary as well. Again, it's free on YouTube. You don't have to pay for it. So yeah, that's pretty much all that I have for today for you guys. I'm going to quickly throw up on screen now a list of more of George Orwell's literature. If you guys want to dive deeper into his writings, if you want to pick up his other novels or his essays or whatnot, I will make a video on why you should read Animal Farm, Road to Wigan Pier, and maybe a couple others in the future, so you can be expecting those further down the line. Like I said, I'll eventually make a full book analysis video on 1984. We'll see when I get around to that. I really want to go through it chapter by chapter and provide you guys with a definitive analysis of this book. It'll probably be a pretty long video, probably somewhere between 2 and 3 hours long, maybe even longer than that. We'll see. But yeah, that'll come out at some point in the future when I have a little bit more time to dedicate to this channel. So don't forget to like, subscribe, share with your friends to help boost this channel and the algorithm. And before we wrap up, I just want to leave you guys with one quote from the book. It's my favorite quote from 1984, and it's, "The best books are those that tell you what you already know." I think that's absolutely true. I think the greatest works of fiction of all time, they tell you things that you already kind of know. It's a truth that feels like it's already baked into your heart or baked into your mind, and it's just the writer that's revealing it to you in a beautiful way, hopefully, like Orwell can, or Dostoevsky, or any of the great writers of all time, right? They reveal truth that you already know in kind of the deepest and most beautiful way. And that's why they're the greatest writers of all time. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. As always, it means the world to me. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.